Okay, here we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1, action.
Assume nothing.
Brash, bald-faced blasphemy.
Question everything.
I find it extremely hard to imagine.
Open your eyes.
It is quite all right to be an atheist.
The fastest growing group of people in the country has been measured as being those who have no belief or who are atheists.
You don't have to be apologetic or quiet about it.
Challenge the opposition.
You see religion on 100 fronts losing the argument.
And start thinking. This is The Thinking Atheist Worldwide.
Our broadcast tonight brought to you by Harry's.com. Harry's Razors. Quality razors for you. Great gifts for the holidays. Free shipping. $5 off your first order when you go to Harry's.com and you type in our coupon code, which is Thinking Atheist. That's Harry's.com, promo code Thinking Atheist. Glad to have them on the show. My special guest tonight has a resume this big. And I actually sort of ran it by her like, really, you do all this stuff? So I'm going to give it a shot. Cara Santa Maria has dedicated her life to improving science literacy by communicating science, teaching science across media platforms. She's from North Texas. She has taught biology and psychology courses to university undergraduates and high school students in Texas and New York. Her published research has spanned various topics, including clinical psychological assessment, the neuropsychology of blindness, neuronal cell culture techniques, and computational neurophysiology. She was a senior science correspondent for the Huffington Post and co-starred in Hacking the Planet and the Truth About Twisters on the Weather Channel. You've seen her on CNN, Fox News, TLC, Current TV, BBC America, G4, Sundance TV, the Travel Channel, and Nat Geo Wild. She currently hosts a weekly science podcast called Talk Nerdy, and she joins me on the radio tonight. Cara, glad to have you.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here. What an intro.
I felt the same way when I introduced Lawrence Krauss, right? Who is, by the way, was just named Humanist of the Year by the American Humanist Association. But whenever I introduced him, when it was over, I thought, geez, I feel like I should be giving him an award. You know, ladies and gentlemen, Cara Santa Maria.
Is 1,000 times more accomplished than I am, for sure.
Yeah, I was glad to see him get the award. Did you see the news that he had received the Humanist of the Year award for 2015?
I did not, but that's wonderful. I mean, if anyone deserves it, he definitely does. He does a lot of great work in kind of atheist and humanist communication and science communication.
To make science palatable for the rest of us is probably a challenge for many scientists, right? I mean, to know science and communicate science, not necessarily the same thing, right? And you probably have seen that firsthand.
Completely. It's not at all the same thing. And that's something that I work really hard to do in my kind of daily life. So I actually left science as a career. I left doing bench work and lab work and went into science communication full time, mostly because it does require that kind of attention. So I'm always blown away when I see working scientists, people like Lawrence Krauss or Sean Carroll or P.Z. Myers, who are actively doing science and also communicating science at the level that they are, because that is 2 full-time jobs.
Well, normally I do a short monologue and the sponsor before I bring my guest on, but I figure I'd just bring you on early and you could come along for the ride. Is that cool with you?
I'd love to.
I believe the first time I saw you speak was at last year's American Atheist National Convention. Would that be correct? You were there in Salt Lake City?
No, I was there the year before in Austin.
In Austin, Texas in 2013. That's right.
Yeah, that's when I was at the last time I did American Atheist was in 2013 in Austin. And earlier this year at Aposticon.
That's right. I saw you at Aposticon this year and saw you at American Atheist in 2013. Well, the reason I bring American Atheist Convention up is because they just announced they got a couple of the guys from Mystery Science Theater 3000 scheduled for the convention in Memphis the first weekend of April. Now, they haven't said what film they're going to be sort of lampooning, doing the commentary on, but I'm guessing it's the new Kirk Cameron film on Christmas. Have you heard about Kirk Cameron saving Christmas?
so good. I really need to see this.
That alone would be worth my ticket. And they just sent the email out today announcing that a couple of the characters are going to be there. They're going to be doing a live edition of MST3K there. They haven't said they're doing the Cameron movie, but it's so ripe. It's so perfect. It would be so beautiful to see Kirk Cameron Saving Christmas be the film that they do. Hopefully we'll get a confirmation one way or the other. Have you been following the story with Kirk Cameron, Cara? You've been watching this?
I mean, I know of it. I know that he has a film and he is attempting to save Christmas, but I'm not really sure if have there been a lot of twists and turns in the story?
Well, mostly it's that the film sucks. That's mostly the big, and it's not a twist. Everyone saw it coming. What's fun, though, is to watch the internet, which is not really Kirk Cameron's audience, right? He's got this little group of pod people over here that pat him on the back and tell him he's wonderful. Yes, the pagans did steal Christmas from Christians, right? They affirmed that nonsense to him. Well, the Internet Movie Database just came out and announced that Kirk Cameron Saving Christmas is the worst reviewed film of all time. I mean, just awesome.
My, that's amazing, especially considering that he does have these pod people, and these pod people could be rating and reviewing. You know how sometimes you see these kind of inflated reviews when you have very lateralized people, and so it's actually pretty interesting that his followers didn't really stand up and fight to make sure that it wasn't the worst reviewed film of all time.
I think he went on Facebook. I made a comment about this. He went on Facebook and he asked the people on his page, and he has quite a large Facebook following, to go and review his film positively. Now, he pitched this as, this is Satan's attack. This is the evil atheist attack on Jesus. Let's go defend Jesus. Give my film a positive word on Rotten Tomatoes. And I thought to myself, is that really how an objective review process is supposed to work, where the producer says, hey, everybody, go and say something nice about my work? I don't think that's an objective or fair or truthful way to review a work on its own merit. And so it was odd to see him just say, hey, everybody, go over and pat me on the back on this website and we'll spread the love of Jesus, that kind of thing. So.
I'll give him a pass on that. I mean, we all do that, right? Like on my podcast, I definitely say, hey, guys, listen to Talk Nerdy, rate, review on iTunes. It really helps me.
No, but you don't say, tell everyone I'm amazing. Right. I mean,
no, I don't do that, but I definitely prefer if I get a positive review. I think at a certain point, you do have to kind of draw the line between journalism and entertainment, and whether Kirk Cameron, in his delusional mind, thinks that this film is based on fact. We all know that what it really is entertainment. How entertaining it is probably up for debate, but it's definitely not journalism. So I kind of give him a pass on that.
I think if I went on my Facebook page and I said, everyone, please go and like my book. It's not an honest. Instead, I would probably phrase it, if you really enjoyed yourself and you thought it was good and you think others will benefit and enjoy it, go and say something nice. I buy that.
That's true.
Yeah, it's not, hey, everybody, positively review it because Jesus is under attack and I'm his champion here on earth. So I don't know. I've been kind of following the story. I wonder how Kirk himself feels about that. Regardless of what he says publicly, it's got to sting. Worst movie.
About a lot of things. I wonder how he feels about having become this kind of figurehead, this poster child. I mean, we remember him as a beloved sitcom character in the late 80s, early 90s, I'm assuming that was. Yeah. And then all of a sudden I remember thinking, wow, that's that guy from that show. And now he's like this, kind of this soldier for Christ, and really has become sort of the face of super evangelical, super right-wing Christian Coalition for Youth, which is a big thing to take on, especially because, as we know, young people in droves are leaving religion, are becoming more progressive thinkers, and are really turning their backs specifically on the way that a lot of them were raised. I think that if Kirk were appealing more to an older demographic, he'd probably be a little bit more successful.
How does somebody who was a child star in the 80s appeal to a young demographic today? I'm not sure
I think it's that he's basically not Ben Stein.
Yeah. Yeah. I always think of Expelled, the film Expelled.
The American Atheist Convention and the Mystery Science Theater guys. If it's not going to be Kirk Cameron's movie, then I really hope it's Ben Stein's movie.
I never saw Expelled. Was it? I mean, I know that he sort of. I think Dawkins felt sort of duped. He was interviewed or something for the film. Didn't know anything about Ben Stein, just sat down, and before you know it, they had taken, I don't know if it was an unfair edit or something, but he was not pleased with how he had been represented in the movie Expelled. Have you seen the film?
I haven't seen it either, but I would love to watch it with a big group of people who would be, interested in lampooning it alongside me. I'm not sure if watching it on my own, like watching Netflix at night on my couch with my dog, if I wouldn't just get really mad. But I feel like with the support of other atheists around me to make light, it might make it a little bit easier. But I definitely know, I mean, at the time, this is not an uncommon approach. The same thing happened to quite a few scientists when that awful movie, What the Bleep Do We Know, came out, where they all felt very much duped because they were brought in to do these interviews under circumstances that they didn't fully understand, and they were completely taken out of context and misquoted and put into the film. And it really does seem like some of these very legitimate scientists in this movie are supporting these woo-woo ideas that quantum mechanics can be applied to like spirituality and the soul, which, as we all know, is bullshit.
Yeah, it's weird kind of quote mining. Those who are in the editing room have a tremendous amount of power, and that's true on all sides. It's a tremendous measure of responsibility that producers carry to make sure that they don't misrepresent the message, which is easy to do, right? When you're in the editing room and you see a killer soundbite out of context, it would be easy for some people to slide it in and not really.
And we all understand the purpose of doing that for satire, for comedy. But the truth is, journalists and documentarians alike have a responsibility to their viewers. I mean, it's a part of kind of an oath that you take when you do this kind of work, which is that you try your best to deliver truth and to deliver unbiased opinions as often as possible, or if you are going to show opinion-laden interview, that you show alternative ideas back to back. I mean, that's what good journalism is. If the jury is out on something, if there's no consensus within the scientific community or within the community at large, then you show differing people with different opinions. But when you are making a film that's not a documentary film, it's a propaganda piece, of course, you're going to take all sorts of liberties in the edit room. It's so easy to do. Trust me, I work every day in an edit bay, not every day, but multiple times a week in an edit bay. It is so easy to do. And you feel the temptation. You just obviously never give into it if you're trying to make legitimate journalism.
I do have some questions from our listeners that we'll get to here in just a second. But first, I want to do due diligence for tonight's show sponsor. And it's great to have them for their second consecutive week. Harry's Razors. Go to harrys.com. By the way, I just picked up 3 razor packets for stocking stuffers for my own family because I dig what they do. High quality razors. They have a really good weight and feel. They're not cheap. They feel good against your face, and they're an impressive company. Check out the website. Go to harrys.com. You can actually design a plan, like a shave plan, customized for you, depending on if you shave once a day, twice a week, whatever. And you can find awesome Christmas gift options like the Truman set and the Winston set and the Winter Winston set. You can get them engraved, aftershave, shaving cream, all that stuff. They're showing the big boys how it's done. They ship right to you for free, and they donate portions of sales and employees' time to support communities as well. They're giving something back. I like them. I think you'll like them. They just came out with a limited edition line for the holidays, giftable sets that start at $15, which means when you pop in my promo code, Thinking Atheist, you get the razor, 3 quality blades, a tube of foaming gel or shave cream for $10. Harry's, a shave good enough to gift. Go to harrys.com, promo code Thinking Atheist. That's harrys.com, promo code Thinking Atheist. And thanks for supporting the show. Cara Santa Maria, what is computational neurophysiology?
So neuro refers to the brain. So when we say neuroscience, for example, that's a pretty broad term. It just means anybody who works in brain sciences. Could be neurobiology, neurochemistry, neurophysics, neuropsychology. Neurophysiology specifically looks at the physiological processes of the brain, and oftentimes it refers to the electrical components as opposed to the chemical components of the brain. And computational neurophysiology is using kind of math and different algorithms to try to understand the way that the cells in the brain form networks, the way that they interact with one another, and kind of map some of those networks out. So a lot of times in neuroscience, we have a long, healthy history of studying exactly what an individual nerve cell does, a brain cell called a neuron, and we have a long, healthy history of understanding globally kind of what the brain is capable of. So if you get damage to one area, how does that affect you? Or, this area of the brain under a scanner seems to be correlated with that kind of behavior. Where we're starting to know that a lot of information lies that we haven't been able to really investigate until maybe the last decade or so is within the network level of neuroscience. So we know what's going on with the cells to a pretty good extent. We know what's going on globally to a pretty good extent, but how those cells communicate with one another, how they interact, how they form networks and reform networks throughout the brain in a function we call plasticity, there's so much we don't understand about that, and that's where my graduate level research was at the time when I was working on my master's degree.
How does a rational brain accept irrational things? Forgive the broad question, but you see hugely intelligent people, hugely educated people who will often accept pretty crazy stuff. And as you look at the brain, is there a sort of a chemical and electrical reason that this happens? I mean, what's your take on all of that?
I think it's a lot more complicated than something as simple as what's happening at an individual cellular level. So when we talk about electrical and chemical functioning in the brain, what we're really talking about is cell-to-cell communication or big populations of cells that have shared characteristics like a pathway that has, for example, a dopamine pathway or a GABAergic pathway or a serotogenic pathway. But I think that what we're talking about here is a much more high-level phenomenon. So this is a phenomenon where you have the brain's architecture and the functionality of the brain, and you have some environmental, experiential things that contribute to how the brain functions. And I would venture, and of course, I'm not really an expert on why people believe weird things. Michael Shermer is probably the guy to talk to about that. I mean, he does have a book called Why People Believe Weird Things. But definitely we are creatures of our environments, and we evolved here on Earth in kinship scenarios. We evolved in families. We evolved in communities. And we evolved in a very linguistic and pictorial way. We evolved to have symbols, and those symbols represent the things that we encounter all of the time in our daily lives. And during that evolutionary process, it was not uncommon for us to not know how to explain some of the phenomena that we experienced. We are scientific by nature. Something happens, we question it. We want to know why it happens, and we try and come up with an answer. But pre-science, meaning pre-modern science, the utilization of the scientific method, we had to come up with interesting explanations for things. And as the years went on, some people embraced more modern explanations and they embraced the scientific method, and some people have a hard time moving into a progressive view. They're conservative by nature. They're more comfortable holding on to what they previously thought was true. And I think that that's why you end up seeing individuals who maybe are scientists that are religious, or you end up seeing individuals who are really well versed in the sciences, but for example are weird about one or two things like vaccines or health things. It's because not only are they holding on to something that seemed to be true, they probably also have experienced personal reinforcements of that. We talk about science. It's a global phenomenon. We do science, but science is something that occurs in labs across the world. I do an experiment and get a single finding. That's almost meaningless until I compare it to other people's findings and other people's findings and other people's findings. And eventually we can call what once was a hypothesis a theory. A theory is something that holds water and it's been tested and tried and true. Now, I personally, as a human being going through my life and through the world, am going to have experiences that are more anecdotal. They're not data-driven because it's just me. And sometimes they have very strong emotional components that are tied to them. And even in the face of hard data, I may not believe that data because I had that personal experience and it spoke to me and it had a valence, an emotional valence that's so much stronger than numbers on a spreadsheet could ever be. And that's a really hard thing to break through. That's something that we struggle with, I think, as science communicators.
Let's come back to something you touched on. We do science every day. Everyone does science in a fashion. You don't have to have a PhD in a science to be able to participate in learning the scientific way. I mean, even when you're a child and you're putting your hand close to the burning flame on the stove and you realize, wait, that's hot. I need to pull away. That produces heat. That flame is this color. You're actually doing a kind of science. And many of us who are not PhDs in science are often intimidated when we say, oh, you're learning about science. We're doing science. We're teaching science. But science is something we all can enjoy. You want to elaborate on that?
I feel the same way, and I don't have a PhD in the sciences. I'm actually a PhD dropout, and that's something that I think that coming from the sciences but leaving and going into science communication, I encounter all the time, is that people who have normal jobs, not lab scientists, are sometimes turned off by the way that science is often presented. And the reason for that is that within the scientific community, there are specific ways that individuals communicate, and it's kind of like a shorthand. It's the same thing as like the last time you were at the hospital, for example, or the last time that you were at the car mechanic, for example. You heard the professionals there communicating with each other and using a bunch of words that you didn't really understand. And the reason that they do that is because one word might take to a layperson 7 words to explain what it means. It's a shorthand. It's the lexicon of that field, of that specialty. Science is just really extreme in this way. And so one thing that I always say when I talk to people about science communication is that you should never underestimate the intelligence of your audience, but you should always underestimate their vocabulary. Because if for a living I am a history teacher or I am, work in a stock room, I don't need to know scientific terms. They don't ever affect me in my everyday life. But that doesn't mean that I can't think scientifically. And that's something that a lot of people, I think, forget or maybe never had really solid teachers and role models to show them. Science is not a bunch of facts and figures that you have to memorize. Science is not a textbook. Science is a process. It's a way that we interrogate and observe the universe around us in order to answer questions. Kids are natural scientists. They do it naturally all the time, and they do it in a way that's very close to the scientific method. They just do it. And somehow we beat that out of them through our academic programs. And a lot of times you start to see this loss of scientific thought occurring around middle school and high school. And then it gets to a point now where, man on the street interviews, if I go out on Melrose Avenue right here outside of my apartment in Los Angeles and ask people basic questions about, what does the liver do? What does the pancreas do? How do plants photosynthesize? What does that mean? A lot of those questions are unanswered, and these are basic things that we all learned when we were young.
I'm reminded of that quote by Carl Sagan, science is a way of thinking much more than it is a body of knowledge.
Yes, exactly. And the truth is, It's 2014, almost 2015. You've got an iPhone in your hand. You can Google almost anything. A lot of that body of knowledge is recorded and it's accessible. I am much less concerned. Back when I was teaching in psych and biology, like you mentioned, I was much less concerned with how much of that discrete knowledge the kids could pull up on command, and much more concerned with their ability to reason through a question, their ability to problem solve and to explore the universe in a scientific way. We can look stuff up. That's not the important thing.
Talking here with my special guest, Cara Santa Maria. Had an email from Jimmy who said, how does a science enthusiast with a degree in communication studies and background in sales get involved in promoting science to the public? Instead of being an inactive observer, I want to be an active participant. This is difficult as I live about 10 minutes away from the Creation Museum and in the largely Catholic area of Greater Cincinnati. Any advice would be awesome. How can someone be effective to sort of be a pro-rationalist out there in this world?
Well, I think that in those kinds of areas, that's where it's needed the most. You have an untapped resource because even though it seems superficially, because the status quo is creationism and religiosity, there are always people kind of marbled in who are thoughtful and progressive, or they're just kind of on the fence. They're so bombarded every day with overt religiosity that they're like, I don't know if this is true. I'm not sure if this speaks to me, but it's all I ever see, so maybe I should just take it at face value. So there are people there who are craving for you, Jenny, to communicate science. There are people there who are desperate to hear an alternative point of view. So right there you have that on your side. I'd say secondarily, seek out academic institutions. You may have a nearby university or even a community college. You may have nearby libraries or city institutions, and you have the cred. If you have a communications degree and a sales background, you're actually probably more equipped to communicate science than most people with scientific backgrounds because you know how to tell a story. You know how to sell something to somebody. So that's a great jumping off point. And there are a lot of really great careers available out there. Public information officers for universities, PIOs, publicists, people who work in the public relations department for organizations. All of these places need people like you. So I would start to look for the organizations that matter to you and see if they're looking for somebody in their publicity arena.
Cara, were you ever one of those people? You were religious or a fence sitter, somebody who sort of had to emerge from the cocoon of religion? Did you have any of that in your life?
So I did have to emerge from the cocoon of religion, but I was never a fence sitter in that I was raised Mormon. I was raised LDS to a very strong and devout LDS family in North Texas. And I left the church when I was about 14. And I had been, I guess, questioning for a while, but when I look back now, I sometimes ask myself if I ever truly did believe. I wonder if I've always been a little bit of I've always had kind of a revolutionary spirit. I've always been somebody who questions before I take anything at face value. And I think from the time I was very young, the dogma of the LDS faith didn't sit well with me. But it's a weird religion, man. It's very communal. You feel like you want to impress your parents. It's a very family-oriented religion. So you're raised well. You're raised in this community. And the right thing to do is to go to church and say that you believe in God and Jesus and that you follow all of the Gospels. And when you're 8 years old, you get baptized. And at 8, you're not thinking about whether or not you have a testimony. You're not thinking about whether or not this speaks to you and it's actually true. You're thinking about what mom and dad want you to do so you can be a good daughter. And that's really what it was like for me. So by the time I was 14 and I didn't really give a shit anymore, and I was like, okay, I'm not trying to impress you people. I need to live my life. I had a very meaningful coming out experience. I liken it very much unto my friends who came out of the closet as gay, lesbian, transgender, or bisexual. I think it's very similar for a lot of atheists. It's a lifestyle and a way that other people are going to look at your personality that is alien to them, that in many ways they think is wrong, they think is dirty, and it's a hard thing to push through. But man, when you do, it's so freeing. and you eventually meet other people just like you, and you realize, like everybody does, why did I wait so long?
Well, I don't want to touch any sensitive nerves here, but I mean, normally when someone walks away from the Mormon church, the families walk away from the apostate. Did you have any sort of familial consequences for leaving when you were 14?
Absolutely, I did. It's not to the same extent that some of my friends who I've met who were Jehovah's Witnesses experienced, where even now as adults, they're not invited into their families. The Mormon faith is a little bit more mainstream. You know, it's not something where they kind of section them off from society. They very much live in modern society. And so because of that, what most people that I've talked to have experienced is intense familial difficulty early on, and then a slow process of kind of healing and rebuilding. And that's really where I was too. At 14, I left the church, and I had a special situation in that my parents were divorced. And my mother at this point had sort of become inactive, and I don't know if she was actively questioning. I'm not sure if she was ever really a true believer. Even today, I wouldn't call her an atheist. I might call her a humanist. My father was still very devout, very active. His wife was very devout and active. All of their other children were. And so when I left the church, my father told me, who I had joint custody with, so I only stayed with him every few weekends and a little bit in the summer. He told me, I have a moral obligation to God to force you to go to church until you're 18. And I said, as a snarky 14-year-old, well, I'm pretty sure I'm at an age of consent. If you really wanted to go through a court battle and talk to a judge, I'd be happy to, in my precocious way, explain to that judge why I feel like my civil liberties are being taken from me. And in essence, my dad kind of gave me a choice that at 14, was kind of an unfair choice. He basically said, you come to church with me as long as you live under my roof, or you don't ever come here anymore. And I had to choose at the time not to live there anymore. So I lived full-time with my mother, and I didn't speak to my father for many, many years. Now I'm 31. It's been, a lifetime, and my father and I are on very good terms. We're definitely on speaking terms. I see him every year during the holidays. He's a very loving man. He's loving to his family, and we can even talk about all of it. It's not like there are just certain things we don't talk about. We can be very frank and open, but there's always something there, as you might expect. And I think the best way to describe it, because I'm well past the angst and the anger that a lot of, I think, kids and even adults experience with their families when they first leave religion. I'm well past that. I think what it is more sadness, maybe a little bit of sorrow, deep empathy. In a way, I know that he feels deeply sorry for me because he truly believes in the Gospels of the LDS faith. So he truly believes that I am going to go to outer darkness, for example, that I'm not going to live with him in the celestial kingdom. And in a way, I feel bad for him because he lives in this bubble and that he's never had the opportunity to see the world outside of this kind of this religious veil.
I've got an email from Adam who says, will you ask Cara why she has the tattoo of a microraptor?
Yes. So it's actually Archaeopteryx lithographica, but, obviously a very similar dinosaur. You've probably seen Archaeopteryx, the Berlin specimen, even though you don't know it. It's a really famous fossil that's often shown because it's it's one of the most intact fossils you'll ever see in this slab of limestone, and it has big, beautiful wings and feathers all across it. And the reason that I have this is, I'm a huge dinophile. I'm obsessed with dinosaurs. Never grew out of it as a kid. Don't think anybody ever should. So that was just my way to kind of show how much I love dinosaurs and wear it proudly on my forearm. But also, in many ways, it's kind of like a fuck you to creationists because like Archaeopteryx, just like Microraptor, these are missing linked dinosaurs. You know how they always say we've never found a missing link? And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, every dinosaur is a missing link. Like, every dinosaur we see is a transitional fossil to another species. And Archaeopteryx is such a beautiful example of that because it literally has dinosaurian features and bird features. A lot of people call it a proto-bird, a very early bird, and a lot of people call it a dinosaur. It's hard to put it into one or the other category because it literally has the features of both organisms. It's a beautiful example of how these wonderful theropods who did evolve to become the modern birds that we see today.
So you just had to go get the tattoo. You just had to have one.
Well, I've got, it's not my only tattoo. I'm definitely a person who likes tattoos. I have a tattoo of Texas on the back of my arm. I have a Carl Sagan quote on my ribs that says, "We are a way for the cosmos to know itself." I've got tattoos to spare.
I've heard it's addictive. I don't have any. I've heard that once you go and you get one, it's like you want to go get another and another, and it becomes like a thing. Is it an addictive deal?
It's a little bit addictive, but I think almost more than that, because it's not like it's fun. Like, it doesn't feel good to get a tattoo. So I think more than that, it's just that there are people who like having body art, and the reason that people say, oh, it's addictive, once you get one, you're going to want to get more, is because they probably always wanted to have more than one tattoo. They like the idea of having tattoos, plural, but they're reticent. They're afraid because it hurts. And so before you get your first one, you're like, oh, am I going to want to do this? Am I going to regret it? Am I going to be in pain? And then when you realize that it's kind of not that big of a deal, then you're like, oh, well, yeah, of course I want to get another tattoo. I love my tattoo. My tattoo is beautiful. Why wouldn't I have more than one?
You mentioned a few times some of the challenges with science literacy. We had an email that mentioned the Creation Museum. Is there an indention on your desk from all the head pounding that you have done in this country when it comes to science literacy? You just want to sound off on that subject for a second?
I mean, I get mad. I think part of the reason that I used to get mad because I used to have this view of like, why are people so stupid? All the information is in front of you, and how can religious people be so stupid? I used to be a more kind of new atheist in that way, and it bled over into my science communication work. And one thing that I recently was speaking about at Skepticon, which is another kind of free thinker conference, is I was talking about how that new atheist approach I'm finding isn't working that well. And I don't think that it's the best way to reach people. Now, the reason I say that is because I'm a science communicator, and my main goal in life is to improve science literacy. And probably the worst way to go about doing that is to look somebody in the face and go, "You're dumb because you believe in God." I don't think that person is going to listen to anything I say after that. It's really disrespectful, and it doesn't take into account any of the complexity of their life experience or where they come from. A lot of times I think that science literacy, and now I'm not the kind of person who completely shirks personal responsibility by any stretch. I think that we need to take it upon ourselves to educate ourselves, and it needs to be a goal again to be knowledgeable. Yet, I will say that I don't think that society, and I don't think that a lot of the institutions that we grow up in are really there to support us very much. I mean, look at our elected officials. Look at the kinds of organizations at the governmental level, the House Committee on Space and Science, the House Environmental Committee. These things are chaired and are filled with committee members who are climate change deniers, who are anti-vaxxers, who think that life begins at conception. These are people who dramatically kind of induce anti-science thinking in our culture. And the reason for it is not because they're dumb, and it's not because they're, conniving. It's really because there's money behind it. There are public interests at play that perpetuate these anti-science myths. And the reason they do it is because it helps them get what they want from a governmental perspective. You look at the Koch brothers have very specific goals, political goals, but they know that the way to keep the Republican Party strong and to keep that base kind of rallied is to focus on third rail kind of family values, conservative social issues. Because the minute that they actually start talking about things with real political clout, they're going to lose the interest of these people. So there's an echo chamber there that's perpetuated intentionally. And that echo chamber is very hard to break free from if you grow up in a community where that's all you ever hear. That's your parents, that's your teachers, that's your friends.
Well, it's a Fox News culture. I was kind of raised in it. I know you've appeared on Fox News. What was your experience there?
Yeah, I mean, the Fox News cult is a dangerous one. all of Fox News is not the same. I will give you that. I mean, granted, I think when I was on Fox News, I was on like Geraldo's show, and it was a pretty horrifying experience. I was brought on. Yeah, it was bad. I was brought on to talk about Huntington's disease. At the time, there was this really awful news story about a little girl who was dying of Huntington's disease, and there were these neighbors who were basically bullying her. And so it was kind of a bullying story. They were kind of publishing that she had this disease. They were driving up and down her street in a hearse. They were leaving horrible messages, and it was just really gross. And so I came on the show to kind of sort of as a pundit, as a talking head, to talk about Huntington's. But Geraldo had no interest in talking about Huntington's, and he just kept saying, like, why don't they go to jail? Why isn't this illegal? And I was like, you have a lawyer on your show. There are free speech issues at play. That's not my expertise. I mean, obviously, I condemn everything that these horrible people are doing, but they have the right to do it. And it just became a conversation that was beyond what I was there for. But really, it wasn't highly politicized when I was on Fox News. I have never sat down like David Silverman from American Atheist, for example, has, and taken on Bill O'Reilly. I don't know if I would be any good at that.
Well, I think the challenge is, they force you to speak in these 6-second sound bites, and then they interrupt, and there's not really any conversation going on, just sort of a tit-for-tat shouting, and then before you know it, it's a commercial break. It's hard for me to really get into it because I don't feel like they have the time to really do anything of substance. Do you see that challenge?
Of course, I completely agree. Actually, one of my earliest episodes of Talk Nerdy, my podcast, I sat down with Anna Kasparian, who is the co-host of The Young Turks, which is an internet news organization, a pretty progressive internet news organization. And we talked at length about the difference between working in traditional media and working in new media, because I have a lot of experience in both. I have experience doing scientific shoots in the field, doing traditional journalism. I also have experience doing a live daily show in a sound studio, with teleprompters and multi-cameras and guests and the whole 9 yards. And then I have experience doing long-form web content and podcasting. I 100% prefer to do long-form new media as opposed to traditional media. And the reason for it is because it's way more difficult to be taken out of context when you have the time to explain yourself. And the truth is, I'm a promoter of nuanced thinking, and this is something that I think we're heavily lacking in our political discourse and just in our media as a whole. You hit the nail on the head. These 6-second sound bites don't tell you anything. There's no depth of thought there. All that you have is just total kind of binary thinking, which is not an appropriate way to elevate discourse. It's not an appropriate way to really talk about the nuance of religion and politics and scientific thought. The best way to do that is to do exactly what you and I are doing right now and have a real conversation.
It seems to be designed to at least appear combative. I don't know if that's a ratings thing, but if you and I are talking and we're really rushing to get something in before the commercial and everybody's shouting, it's really more about scoring points in the short run than understanding in the long run. And I honestly wonder, if someone gave me the invite that they gave Silverman, hey, we'd like you to come on to O'Reilly, I'm sure they would never do that, but no one gives a shit. But if they were to call me, I honestly don't know if I'd do it, because I think, could I be effective if we always sounded like we were late for work? And I don't know.
And I think it is by design. I think it's A, because it gets ratings, but it's B, kind of intrinsic to the talent that they hire on these shows. O'Reilly has a very specific way of speaking that commands attention, and there is some anger. Remember Keith Olbermann? And he was a lefty, but he has this anger to him, this kind of intense way of speaking that I think their producers and those network executives look at and say, oh, this person gets heard. This person's voice rises above. Now, I personally think that there are other ways to do that, and I think that we've seen some people on air who are very effective who don't have to scream and yell to be heard. They just say smart, witty things. But I completely agree. I don't know if I would go on on O'Reilly's show, the same way I don't think I could sit down, just like Bill Nye did, with Ken Ham and have a debate about creationism, religion, and scientific thought. And it's not because I think that I don't know more than Ken Ham. I know more than Ken Ham. I know Ken Ham is wrong about pretty much everything. But I'm not a professional debater. And it's less about, in these instances, the content and what's actually said. It's much more about the style and the way that it's communicated. I think Ken Ham would run circles around me and make me look like an idiot, even though everything that comes out of his mouth is pure drivel.
Yeah, it'd be audience driven. He'd just be setting traps, debate tricks, essentially, is what it would be.
It's kind of like your listeners who are students who are getting ready to take either their SAT because they're graduating high school or their GRE because they're graduating from undergrad and they're about to go into graduate school. These tests, do they really look at how much you know, or do they look at how good you are at taking these tests? And that's been a huge critique across the board for quite a long time, and I see strong similarities there to a debate structure like that. It's not really about being able to get a real point across. It's about being good at debating.
I had an email from Quentin who said, I've always enjoyed reading science fiction, such as Isaac Asimov, H.G. Wells, Ray Bradbury. One of my favorite authors is Philip K. Dick, author of the basis for Minority Report, Blade Runner, and Total Recall. In many of his novels, Philip deals with a world in which the characters and readers are unsure as to the reality of said world. So here's my question. How likely is it that this may be more a question for Krauss than anybody? I don't know. How likely is it there are other realities or worlds or perhaps parallel universes? Are they real science or things made up by science fiction? Ever pondered this stuff, Cara? You want to weigh in at all?
I actually have, and I've interviewed quite a few scientists about this phenomenon. I've talked about multiverse theory to Sean Carroll. I've talked about multiverse theory to Mark Jackson and also to Brian Greene, Brian Greene gave me the most insight on it because he is a string theorist who focuses on multiverse theory in a lot of his theoretical research and in his popular science communication. And the thing about the multiverse theory, and maybe I shouldn't even use the word theory because a theory in theoretical physics is very different than a theory in most experimental sciences, is that it's kind of impossible to test. The math might work, so there's not a good chance, but there is a chance that there are multiple universes, but by definition, those universes exist discretely. If they do exist at all, they exist discretely. And so we would never have access to one of those universes in order to be able to interrogate it. And the whole kind of foundation for the scientific method is that you have to be able to, it's reality-based. You have to be able to manipulate real things in order to get some sort of answer to a question. And because multiverse, as we understand it right now, is something that exists outside of our realm of reality, interrogating the multiverse, to me, would be in some ways similar to trying to interrogate the concept of heaven. The only difference is that there are mathematical models that allow for it, and there are large overarching physical models that allow for it. And so I think that it's a completely healthy and helpful and important thing to maintain these models and continue to question them. And if we see any sort of direct evidence, that's amazing. But the truth is, it's probably going to remain theoretical as long as we are looking at kind of various explanations for how the universe works for modern cosmology. I don't think, and I think this is something that Brian Greene told me, it's highly doubtful that there's a parallel universe where we all have evil mustaches and are twirling them every day. But you have to allow for the possibility, and that's an important distinction in science. Just because something is possible doesn't mean that it's probable.
I had an email from Anna Maria who asked us, both of us, if we geeked out as much as she did when we saw the film Interstellar. I don't know. Do you go to the movies, Cara?
I do, but I still haven't seen Interstellar, so I can't speak to that at all. I know that the internet was rife with both anger and excitement about Interstellar. You know, all of the science nerds that I'm friends with and that I follow were quick to debunk everything they could and to get mad about all of the things that didn't seem to keep up with reality. But at the same time, there were a ton of people who really were excited about the film and respected the film and were pumped to see so much good science go into it. And I think that's all we can really ask for. You know, movies are a place where fantasy and reality can collide. And I think that when amazing directors and producers are willing to talk to the scientific community through outlets like the Science and Entertainment Exchange and get good science, you know, thinkers to help them make their films, they're only going to end up with better films. But at a certain point, we can't be so critical. We can't be so exact, because then it's not a movie anymore. Then we're watching a lecture, which we don't want to do.
I had an email from Art who just said this: Star Trek or Star Wars? Cara, have you chosen a side in this particular battle?
That's a tough one. I mean, here's the thing. I'm going to be 100% honest. I'm not the biggest sci-fi or fantasy fan. Now, that being said, I don't really think of... I do have a special place in my heart for a specific brand of sci-fi, which is kind of like mid-century Bradbury, Vonnegut, Orwell sci-fi. Sci-fi that has a lot of social ramifications and socio-political implications to it. Now, that being said, I did grow up watching Star Trek, The Next Generation, because my mom was a huge fan, and there's so much good science in Star Trek, and it doesn't feel as fantasy-driven to me. I also love Star Wars. Who doesn't love Star Wars? I mean, it's like, it's a quintessential good versus evil story. It's been told a million times. It's so visually compelling. I skipped out on watching the newer Star Wars, though, or the older, however you want to describe it, the early episodes. I have no interest in these weird CG Star Wars episodes.
There are many of us who we choose to just sort of state outright that we don't believe the prequel films exist. They never happened. Our childhood memories, our beloved childhood memories of Star Wars are absolutely safe. One thing I did like about Trek is that it often incorporated very humanist, very progressive humanist messages. And I think those episodes can be watched. Almost any incarnation of Trek can be watched today, and you can actually really see those humanist messages. I don't know, were you cognizant of that at all?
I mean, I don't think at the time I was, because I was so young when I was watching, but you're completely right. When you rewatch them, you see a lot of things that were very brave. You see a lot of social and political conversations that were had about race at a time when that wasn't being touched on very much. George Takei has spoken very openly about a lot of beautiful conversations that were had between himself and the producers on the show. And I remember seeing an interview with him where he was talking about race relations, but also about, you know, he was gay at the time and he was very open about it. And I think only Shatner was uncomfortable with it. Everybody else was really open and cool with it. But they had actually thought about crossing that bridge, but they knew that the audience wasn't ready. They knew that the audience was ready to have the conversations about race, but maybe not about homosexuality. And so I think Takei was a very interesting and kind of wise and I don't know, he played it so well, and it's interesting to see his perspective looking back on what it was like during the filming of Star Trek. But I definitely think it was a progressive show. And as we know now, so many cool kind of engineering and techie and electronic revolutions have happened because they were sort of born during that show. There were things that were thought up during Star Trek that we now are utilizing in our everyday lives.
Have you noticed that even the religious people who are, let's call it 30 and under today, really aren't freaked out about the stuff that their parents' generation was freaked out about? I mean, if you go to a Christian youth, teenager, young 20-something, and talk about gay rights, I mean, they're not what mom and dad was at the time, back in the 60s and the 70s, which was, it's a sin, it's an abomination, it's perversion, it's Satan's acts of, sexual whatever on planet Earth. It's a sign of the end times. There's none of that. They're like, you know what? Live and be happy. And if you ask them about the woman's right to choose and other things, there seems to be this whole up and coming generation of people who, even if they call themselves religious, really are sort of having more progressive ideas. Have you seen that firsthand?
Completely. And you know what? I think the reason for it is because religion isn't implicitly requiring that we be a patriarchal community, that women be subjugated, that gays and lesbians shouldn't have equal rights or civil liberties. That's not religion. There are many ways to interpret biblical texts. There are many ways to interpret the Torah, the Quran, and even in Eastern religions, there are different ways to interpret these things. This is a generational thing that has everything to do with society and has very little to do with religion. So I think that across the board, if you look at members that consider themselves highly religious or members that consider themselves not as religious, you're going to see more progressive views the younger that you go down the spectrum. Now, obviously, there are correlations between conservative values and religiosity, but I sometimes wonder how easy it is to see a causal link there. Sometimes I wonder if these things don't follow each other. You're a conservative thinker, you're attracted to religion that reinforces your conservative values. You're a progressive thinker, religion starts to turn you off, and then you find other progressive thinkers who reinforce your values. So even young people in religion today, I think, are just generally more progressive because they're more educated and because they have gained the experience of revolution. They've gained the experience of the civil rights movement. We know that our parents or our grandparents were living through that. We know about Japanese internment camps. We know about massive civil rights abuses that have happened by our very government, and we don't want to be involved in that anymore. Young people are also way more concerned about privacy issues. Young people are concerned about torture. You saw this Senate report that came out in the news just today about these CIA Bush-era torture memos that were finally released. It's appalling. It's absolutely appalling. And you see a lot of young people who have kind of an activist mentality about this stuff. I think they're just more focused on civil rights and civil liberties because we're lucky enough to be living in a country that's very free, and we're lucky enough to have learned from the mistakes of our parents and our grandparents.
Cara, do you call yourself an atheist, or do you go with humanist, rationalist, something else?
I go with atheist. The same way I call myself a nerd. I think that for too long, these words that have meaning and that meaning that matters because it's clear and it's to the point, for too long they've been kind of bastardized and used in a way that has a negative connotation. And part of my mission is to be very open about the fact that I am a nerd and it's cool to be a nerd. It's fun to be a nerd and I'm proud of my nerdiness. I'm also an atheist. And you know what? You can be a moral atheist. You can be a warm and nurturing atheist. You can be a thoughtful atheist, as you know very well. And I really want to see us start to rebrand these things, take that label back, because it's a very meaningful label. And a lot of other things, in my view, for me personally, I feel like I was pussyfooting around if I used a different label. Now, I totally understand that different labels actually describe other people's views and values better. But because I don't believe in God, I don't believe in anything supernatural, I don't even really understand the term spiritual, atheist for me is the best label. It's a lack of belief.
Christmas is in 16 days. Do you do Christmas in your house in any form?
I do. I mean, I celebrate Xmas. I try to write it as Xmas instead of Christmas. I definitely don't want Christmas to be taken away. Christmas is a fucking secular holiday. It's not like the Christians are the only ones who get Christmas. The same way that I have Jewish friends who celebrate Hanukkah, but they're not really Jewish. They're atheist Jews. It's a cultural thing. It's a familial thing. It's a traditional thing. So, yes, my family, my father's side especially, might talk about Jesus when they sit around the Christmas tree and they go to church and they do all of those things. I, of course, don't participate in those things. It's a Festivus for the rest of us. It's so very important. And it's a great chance to be able to see your family, to be able to remind them how much you care about them. And, it's a warm time of year. For a lot of us who are really busy and who don't live near where the rest of our family lives, everybody's off work. We have these great hiatuses, especially in LA. Like, in what I do for a living, this city shuts down for a solid 2 weeks to a month. And so even if I am trying to work, I can't get meetings, I can't get anything booked. So everybody's on hiatus, as all your favorite shows go off of air. So, it's a great opportunity to be able to spend time with your family when you may otherwise not be able to. It doesn't have to have anything to do with Christ. You don't have to make it that way. And you shouldn't feel guilty about celebrating Christmas and being a part of the holidays if you're a non-believer. It's not just theirs. You can have it too.
Let's come back to nerdy as we get set to sort of wrap up our evening together. You've got a podcast called Talk Nerdy. You want to give me the skinny on that? I mean, what's the show about? When and where does it air? Give our listeners kind of the cue on where to find you.
Of course. So Talk Nerdy was kind of born out of a lot of other stuff that I was doing. I used to do a web series for the Huffington Post when I was their science correspondent called Talk Nerdy to Me, and I think a lot of people were starting to associate that branding with me. Now, when I left the Huffington Post, they kept the intellectual property because I did it there when I worked for them. So, of course, they continue Talk Nerdy to Me, and I think I'd be remiss if I had called my podcast the exact same name. Talk Nerdy was also born out of a time when I was working on a live daily television show that was a very difficult time for me. It was a struggle because there was a lot of talk this way, act this way, dress this way, don't be yourself. And I was very much being put into a box, and I was trying to push against it. But one of the best ways that I could was to have this wonderful outlet. So I started podcasting at the behest, to a large extent, Joe Rogan and his fans. I was a regular guest on Joe Rogan's podcast, and his fans were amazing. They rallied around. They gave me a lot of support. And really, in many ways, because of them, I started my podcast. My first episode, I think, was in March or April of this year. I am about to post episode 41, I think. My very last episode was with Mark Jackson, a physicist, and the episode before that was Hemant Mehta, as many of your listeners may know him. And so my podcast, it's every week. New episodes come out on Monday, first thing Monday morning. You can find it on iTunes, Stitcher, wherever you can find podcasts, or you can go to my website, carasantamaria.com. That's Cara with a C, and click on podcast. And yeah, Talk Nerdy is just a celebration of all things nerdy. It's me and one guest. It's usually around an hour. A lot of times they're scientists, but sometimes they're not. They're atheists, they're free thinkers, they're political minds, they're philosophical minds, or they're comedians even, just people who I like to have a smart conversation with.
I'll make sure and link that in the description box of the show. I don't mean to drag this out, but I want to go back to something you said. So when you were doing broadcast television, what was it? Wear your hair like this, glasses, no glasses, wear this color shirt, sweater, whatever. I mean, was it that intense?
I had an executive producer at the time who I don't think he liked women very much, and I especially don't think he liked me, which caused a lot of problems on the show. And so to the extent that there would be days when my wardrobe stylist would put me in a short skirt and my makeup artist would put, red lipstick on and big tousled hair, and I would come out, and in my IFB, which is the little earpiece that you wear, I would hear from my executive producer, "Oh, you look really good tonight." And then on the days when I would wear jeans and a sweater and be a little bit more me, not just no comment, sometimes, "Oh, yeah, we can't have that. Oh, you can't wear your hair this way anymore. You can't wear your hair that way." One time, I wore something on air, which I thought was very sexy, which was, like tuxedo pants, a white button-down shirt, and a black tie, and I had my hair up in Heidi braids, and this is a look that I have a lot of times, this kind of androgynous look, and I don't know if it was from the network level down, but definitely from my EP. "Oh, no, we can't have you dressing so masculine on air. That's just not going to work."
I mean, is there anything on television that's real, Cara? I mean, can we trust anything that we're seeing out there, or is it all just the product of consultants these days?
There are shows on TV that are real. I'm very lucky to be a part of two of them. I work as a correspondent on a show called Techno, which is on Al Jazeera America, and I also work as a reporter on a show called SoCal Connected on KCET, which is public television here in Southern California, but those pieces go up on the web after so you can see them nationally and internationally. Both of these shows are pure journalism and a little bit of entertainment thrown in. I get to go out in a field. I have a field producer. I have a crew with me. I get to ask cool scientific questions, cool political questions, tell a story about these things. And that story is as true as I know it to be. I am working very hard to deliver the truth, and I get to have a lot of fun while I'm doing it. They're raw, they're real. I think there's a big difference between what you see in a studio, and you can always tell because it's lit a certain way, it's shot a certain way, and between what you see in the field. But I also think that different television shows are done in different ways. I happen to have a very bad experience in this studio show that I used to work on. I know other people who work in studio shows that are absolutely thrilled, that are completely real. I mean, you look at somebody like Rachel Maddow, of course there are people who are contributing who are saying, you know, this is going to help with ratings, this we want to stay away from, but she's going to say what she's going to say. It's her show. Thing is that when you're on cable or on network television, you're beholden to your sponsors. If your sponsors pull out, you're going to get pressure from the network to not say the types of things that you said that made the sponsors pull out. This is what happened to Bill Maher when he used to have an ABC show called Politically Incorrect. After 9/11, somebody mentioned to him, oh, don't you think the terrorists are total cowards? And he said very outspokenly, no, they're not cowards. It's not cowardice to fly a plane into a building because of your convictions. That's not cowardice at all. And he lost his job. All of his sponsors pulled out. Now that he's on HBO, he can say whatever the fuck he wants, which is great. And that's another reason that new media is so awesome. We can say what we want on the web. We can say what we want on the radio or on our podcasts. And we're not beholden to anybody.
Now, you've mentioned Al Jazeera America, and I'm sure that's piqued the interest of a great many of our listeners. Do you want to speak to Al Jazeera and Al Jazeera America for us?
Yes, I think a lot of people, when they think of Al Jazeera, they think of Arabic Al Jazeera because they are used to seeing in these kind of Middle Eastern countries where there's no freedom of the press and where there's state-run media, they're used to seeing Al Jazeera excerpts when individuals in terror cells have bought airtime and have made statements, for example. That's the Al Jazeera that comes to our head. Now, Al Jazeera as a whole is a large organization, and it's a incredibly legitimate news organization out of Doha in Qatar, or Qatar, depending on how you want to pronounce it. And there are a bunch of different Al Jazeeras now. There's Al Jazeera English, which a lot of your more progressive listeners are probably more familiar with, which is where you see a lot of very good, solid, unbiased reporting that's not that kind of ratings specific. So if you want, a lot of people I know who want to watch good news and who are fed up with CNN and MSNBC, and especially Fox News, watch BBC World News, they watch PBS, and they watch Al Jazeera English. But about a year ago, maybe a little more now, Al Jazeera America launched. So it follows in some ways that Al Jazeera English model. It has very solid reporting. It has really good nightly shows. It has really good international reporting. And I happen to do a show on it that's a little more edutainment. It's a straight science show. So you can catch that. I'm on not every week. I'm on some weeks. And it's a really great show. And I've had the opportunity to meet a bunch of amazing people through Al Jazeera America, and they're really, really great. Oh, and I'm pleased to announce, too, that Techno recently was picked up for syndication by Al Jazeera English, which means that I think it airs in something like 60 English-speaking countries now.
Cara Santa Maria, thanks for, I said this to Neil deGrasse Tyson, and I've said it to Krauss and a few others, but thanks for being a storyteller of science. You know, it's funny, we've got all this amazing information, and yet we're often, as activists, so lousy at communicating it, you know, and trying to reach people to sort of engage all the senses, right? I used to, you can't drag people into a classroom under white hot fluorescent lighting and make a textbook experience something that they're going to get excited about. But if they do things in the kind of formats that you do, now you've got people who are excited about science, and you probably get this in your email inbox all the time, right?
I do, and you know what, it pleases me so much. It's the reason I do what I do, and there are times when I get frustrated. There are times when I have lulls where I don't have a job, or, I'm a freelancer, so sometimes the work comes when it rains, it pours, and sometimes there's a drought. And so there are definitely days, just like anybody in their chosen career path, where you get a little frustrated, where you get disillusioned, where you wonder why you're working so hard. And then you get these emails in your inbox from people saying, you made science accessible, you make me want to go to school to be a scientist, this is really fun, or my daughter is excited about science, you're a role model to her. I mean, that's everything. I can't even express how meaningful that is to me, how much that warms my heart, and how much that immediately motivates me to push through any of the bullshit that I'm feeling, and reminds me that this is a fight that I'm in with a lot of other people, but it's a fight that really, really matters for our future. I appreciate everybody who's involved, and I feel lucky enough that I've been as successful as I've been in working in this field, because it's a dream come true. It's the best job you could ask for.
Her website is carasantamaria.com. Cara, you're a fantastic guest. Thank you so much for squeezing this show into your crazy busy schedule. It means a lot.
Oh, thanks so much, Seth. I had a great time.
Tonight's broadcast brought to you by my friends at harrys.com, where you can check out the Winter Winston set. Totally a home run as a holiday gift this year. Get $5 off your first purchase if you use the promo code Thinking Atheist. Go to harrys.com, HARRYS.com. Enter promo code Thinking Atheist for $5 off. Thank you so much for listening. I will catch you next week on the Thinking Atheist radio podcast.
Follow The Thinking Atheist on Facebook and Twitter. Watch dozens of original videos on the Thinking Atheist YouTube channel. And visit our website for resources, links, contact information, the editor's blog, and more. thethinkingatheist.com.